Hello, everybody. Welcome to Montessori Lives, conversations with Montessorians around the world and in Australia. Tonight, we're honored to have with us Rich Ungerer, who was Executive Director of the American Montessori Society for 13 years, I believe. Is that right, Rich?
Yes.
At least that's how I know you when I was living in the United States. What other roles have you performed in the Montessori world before that and since?
Yeah, my career all began when I was in Boston doing graduate school, and I got very involved in the whole field of internships and experiential education, and then was accepted to go to Washington for a year to be an education policy fellow. And that got me into education policy. And I continued my support and advocacy of experiential education. And I don't think I was aware of Montessori education until the fall of 2004, when I was in between jobs and looking for an executive director position. I'm a real advocate of membership-based organizations. So when I heard about AMS, a membership organization, and its education philosophy being very compatible, but going beyond experiential education, I threw my hat in the ring. And at the time, I think I got some feedback that the AMS search committee board was very cautious about me because I did not have a Montessori credential. And as all of you know, Montessori credential, whatever it is, AMS, AMI, or another group, is really kind of a sign of legitimacy, if I could say it that way. But they realized I had a lot of the right skills to lead an organization. So that got me into AMS and started January of 2005. And immediately that, and I don't know if any of you know Marie Dugan. She was interim before me and head of school in Wilmington, Delaware. And Marie was my mentor, my coach. And she just helped me to understand the organization, the politics, and Montessori. So ever since, it's been a learning experience. Every day I learn more about Montessori.
Yeah, I remember Marie. She was a great Montessori stateswoman, I guess, when I was there. The AMS it's now the largest Montessori organization in the world by far. What was AMS like when you took over? Were they having
Yeah,
large schools at the local school to?
yeah, and I might just qualify when AMS probably likes to say they're the largest organization, but AMI, as you know, has a lot of affiliates in different countries, and so their structure is different, but they are reaching large numbers of teachers and administrators, but their structure is different. AMS is the largest membership-based organization. When I came on board in January, I remember one of the first things I heard when I was looking at finances. Finances were very small and very tight, and my board colleagues were so excited that their conference a couple months before then in Boston, they said, "Rich, this is the first conference in about 10 years where we finally generated a profit." And I was, wow, that's great. Could I take a look at the budget? And their budget for the conference only included direct expenses, coffee and speakers. And what I quickly did is turn things around to say, well, to run an annual conference every year, staff is involved. And I was involved. So we built in our staff costs, we built in our overhead costs. So it was that kind of building an organization, really being sensitive to finances. Increasing attendance at the conference was probably our biggest. I'll call it a profit center, but equally important, increasing school membership, increasing teacher membership, increasing our teacher ed programs, and all of those. Were important in their own right, but from a revenue perspective, they helped to give us the resources to do a lot of the new things that we wanted to do and that I wanted to do. So we started small, and I think in the years I was there, membership grew dramatically. And when I left after 13 years, I was really proud of how we had built the capacity. the one other thing I would say, usually I say small is beautiful. Small organizations are wonderful when you can have a small conference, et cetera. But the beauty of a large organization is that it gives you a financial model where you can generate substantial resources. And I'm sure you're all working with that challenge in Australia from a business model.
How did you attract individual teachers to AMS?
Well, the model at AMS was that schools were members, and then their teachers, I think they had to pay additional. So if you had a school of 20 or 30 teachers, the ideal was that you would include all of those teachers as individual members. And you would pay for that as, the school budget. If you didn't want to, pay for all the teachers, then teachers were given the option to join individually. But most of our teacher members came through the being part of a school membership structure. The same was true with teacher ed programs, where the teacher ed programs were members of AMS, and then their faculty, became individual faculty members.
I see. Now, you grew AMS over 13 years that you were there until about 2019. What have you been doing since in the Montessori world?
Well, the first thing I did was very fortunate. A good colleague who actually I'll see this Friday from Beijing, Shirley Wu, CEO of Wisdom International Education. Little did I know that when she had visited AMS, and I didn't really know who she was, how important she was, but she had been watching me. And then when she heard that I was stepping down from AMS, I don't use the word retirement, but looking for other things, she said, "Well, Rich, would you like to work for Wisdom?" And originally she was, would I like to move to Beijing? And that was not in the cards. And one point I said my wife was, would be part of the decision. She brought my wife over also. So I was in Beijing about 6 times, and got opportunities to visit Shanghai and Chengdu. So for about 3 or 4 years, I was a consultant, senior advisor, chair of their advisory board. And most of my work was with China, and through Wisdom, and then met a lot of other people. And that was just unbelievably fascinating to be able to understand the Chinese culture. And one of the first things we did was the government, well, it was the Chinese Education Society, but they wanted us to take AMS's school accreditation standards and adapt them for China, make them culturally relevant. So a lot of the projects that I was involved in grew out of my prior expertise from AMS. And that actually started before I left AMS. So again, it was that China connection.
And what's your involvement with NCNPS now? Can you explain what that organization is and how you're involved in moving them along?
Yeah, and again, a tiny bit of history for both the National Center for Montessori and the public sector. We created that when I was at AMS. A very wonderful woman who passed away a few months ago, Judy Scheide in Princeton, gave us $500,000 to start the National Center. And so for about 3 years, we just built the National Center. It was within the AMS structure. And then when that money ran out, long story short, the Walton Family Foundation said, "We'll give you more money, but the National Center has to be an independent 501c3 nonprofit." So it spun off. The same thing was true with the Montessori Public Policy Initiative, but that's a separate story. So when the National Center spun off, since I was part of the founding of it, I became part of their board and stayed on the board. And then really we revitalized the board about 3 or 4 years ago. And, I moved up from vice chair to chair, and then now I'm treasurer.
Can you explain what they do in the US? What's their work there for people who don't know NCNPS?
Well, our primary mission, no surprise to anyone, is that we believe that, Montessori private independent schools is wonderful, but expensive for many parents, families. And we believe that we needed a greater presence of Montessori in the public sector. And in the US, that means public schools, magnet schools, charter schools are all public. So our role was to strengthen existing Montessori schools in the public sector, to expand them. And a lot of what the National Center does and makes it unique to other organizations is that our staff provides services to public schools under contract. So not just, how can we help you, but it's hire us and then our consultants go in and really work with schools. We also have a fantastic set of professional development opportunities, just like you do. We have a great set of tools, something called DERS. So we really have developed a lot of services that not only are, I think, appropriate for public schools, but also for private and independent schools. But we're struggling with finances. So, we have a lot more that we'd like to do than, because the Walton Family Foundation, is stepping out of their support of Montessori organizations. And it's hard to get new foundation money. Excuse me.
And how many public programs are there in the US now?
Yeah, the numbers we at one point we said there were 500 Montessori public and charter schools out of a total of 5,000 schools in the US, but other people think there are only 3,000 or 4,000 Montessori public schools. And I guess it depends on whether you include the more authentic ones or whether you include those that are maybe Montessori influenced. So 500 of the 5,000 would be 10%. 500 to 3,000 obviously is less than that. But we see, I think the growth is more likely to happen here in charter schools and in public schools.
And you mentioned the NPPI, the Public Policy Initiative. Can you talk about what that organization does and how it differs to NCNPS?
Yeah, again, when I was at AMS, like most organizations, you have a lot of committees. We had a research committee. We had a policy committee, and we really believed we needed to be more involved in impacting policy, especially in our federal government, but also state and local. And Virginia McHugh, who at the time was executive director of AMI USA, they were also doing policy work. And Virginia and I were, worked closely together. We were real partners, collaborators. And so we started to look at ways. Her approach to public policy was different than ours. To make a long story short, we again went to the Walton Family Foundation, and it was through, actually, you were involved, Mark, with what's now the Trust for Learning, and we said we want to do more. Can you help us? And long story short, again, the Walton Family Foundation came up with money, but they wanted MPPI, and that's saying that we had created MPPI within AMS, but it also was kind of a partnership with AMI USA. And then Walton said, great, we'll give you more money, but you got to be independent. You got to have an independent organization. So MPPI, Montessori Public Policy Initiative, now is, it has a structure that AMS and AMI USA are like legally sort of the co-founders, the co-supporters, and they try to work with other organizations, but it really is a collaborative effort between AMI and AMS. And they're doing a lot of work. Probably the biggest project they've worked on and been very successful is to get many of the states to recognize, the Montessori teaching credential as part of the licensure, whatever the structure is in an individual state. So a teacher doing Montessori, can get recognized in Illinois. And that's really, really important, as I'm sure you know.
So without having to do state licensure, they can just do a Montessori training and be recognized to teach in public Montessori schools in some states?
Yeah, I mean, they can, but it's just a lot harder if it's one-on-one or each organization is different. But it's when a state formally recognizes, like there's legislation, I believe, that recently passed or is about to pass in Illinois, where they're recognizing any Montessori teacher who's from a program that was accredited by MACD, and then they mention affiliated with AMS and or AMI. It's complicated, the politics, but that legitimacy really helps with teachers when they're trying to get recognition, especially in public schools, but even in private schools, that's important.
Yeah, because one of the issues that we have in Australia with that causes a huge shortage of teachers is that teachers in both public and private schools must get state certification as well as Montessori training, and so that is a huge burden on many people who don't want to do 4 years state certification
Right.
and then another 18 months to 2 years on top of that, depending on the level. So you're saying that in the United States, in some states, their Montessori training is recognized by
Right.
states in order to be able to teach in public
Yeah.
schools.
Public, and it also makes
Yeah,
a
that's
difference in private schools. I think New York, as I understand, um, even in private schools, if you have a master's degree, if you're a Montessori teacher and you have a master's degree, it really gives you a real step up and a higher salary, et cetera. But again, each state is different. And I don't pretend to be familiar with, like California, what's going on, but MPPI and, all the organizations, we're working together to really try to tackle what specific challenges there might be in a state.
Yeah.
And again, as I'm sure you're aware, it can be different, elementary and secondary, but then when you get into early childhood and universal pre-K and infant and toddler, again, the funding structure is different in states. The public-private, is not as, as clear as it is for elementary and secondary.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned MACD, that's the other big organization that we should probably talk about. Can you talk about what MACD is and a little bit about the history and what work it does in the United States and worldwide?
Yeah, I'll say way back when, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, AMS, after AMS was formed, they had their own teacher ed program group and commission to accredit their programs. And then our U.S. Department of Education said, you can't accredit yourselves. If you really need to create what became MACD as an organization that's formally recognized by the U.S. Department of Education to accredit teacher education programs, whether they're AMS, AMI, or any other International Montessori Council, et cetera. So then MACD got created. They created their own structure. Most of their funding, comes through dues from the teacher education programs, and and I think the major funding is so if you have a teacher ed program, you pay some dues, but if you have 100, we call them adult learners, then you pay so much per adult learner. And in the beginning, I think MACD was exclusively U.S. based, but as time unfolded, and especially the last 10 years, MACD has really expanded globally. And I don't know how many members they have. I know they have a number of members in China, and they have a number in Europe. So they're really, I think, right now more of a global organization with that outreach, and that strengthens their impact, just because then they're perceived as I'm repeating myself, but as a global organization rather than just a U.S. organization.
So MACTE stands for Montessori Accreditation Council for teachers to teacher education. Why is MACTE important? Why is this such an important organization around the world? Would you say that it's really the closest thing that Montessori world has to a standard setting organization as far as training standards go?
Well, I always kind of divide things into two camps. One is schools, and then that's a whole question of if you have a Montessori school, Are you a member of AMS? Are you accredited by AMS? If you're an AMI school, they may use the word recognized. So it's all about quality and having quality standards and improvement of quality. With teacher education programs, it's the same thing. You can be an AMI teacher education program and connected with them. With AMS, I believe the term they're using is affiliation. But what we did when I was at AMS and from the beginning is most of our member programs were affiliated with AMS, and they are at the same time were accredited by MACD. So that accreditation gives a real sign of commitment and a set of standards. And since they represent a number of organizations, they had to come up with, like if the one of the standards they may be revisiting is how much of your training can be virtual. And of course, that became a lot more possible during the pandemic. But some organizations, are 100% virtual. Some are maybe 80%. Some are 60%. So MACD tries to find that middle ground where, they can reach a consensus, and then they have those standards, and then they, I guess I'll use the word enforce. And if a program isn't meeting their standards, they're put on, they're put on. Well, they eventually can be suspended if a program is not meeting standards. So that gives a real sign to teachers. It helps with their their job search, and when they go to a school and they can say, I'm affiliated with such and such an organization, but I'm accredited by a MACD program. It helps a lot with parents who are trying to pick a school. If they ask the question, are your teachers, are they trained? How do we know they're quality teachers? And all of that's a work in progress, trying to build a global organization and expand it to maintain those quality standards.
Do you think MACD is a unifying force in the Montessori world? Is it accepted by all the major organizations?
It's accepted by some, but AMI, has a different approach, and some of their teacher ed programs in the U.S. are accredited by MACD. All of their other programs outside the U.S., I'm guessing most of them are not, don't have a connection to MACD. But it does provide really an opportunity for building a community of teacher ed programs. MACD, as some of you may know, has a symposium every December, and they're headquartered in Charlottesville, Virginia, and they bring their teacher education program directors and faculty for 2 or 3 days, and that really creates a bonding, a community of identifying issues that need more attention. Like when the virtual learning issue surfaced, that was a place where they could really struggle with how to maintain quality, do it virtually. But then with the pandemic, kind of everybody had to do it virtually. So they were sort of forced into, but they still were very concerned about quality.
Yeah. I've been a part of some of those symposia myself, and it's really good, encouraging to see representatives of all the major organizations from Montessori, at least in the United States, sitting around a table discussing, nitty-gritty issues.
And one other...
I don't know of any other opportunity that we all have really to do that. One
other comment, I'll label it as an observation, and it's a personal one, but one of the things I was very proud of when I was at AMS is that I really did everything I could to build collaboration, to build partnerships with other organizations, AMI, IMC, you name it, MACD. And we built a lot of very important relationships. As I followed the field right now, I see more competition. More organizations are, they're trying to expand. They're trying to grow. They're trying to compete. And I suspect many of you are on mailing lists of different organizations. And just like your own, everybody's doing professional development. Maybe that's good to have lots of, offerers, but lots of opportunities. But my hope is that there'll be more opportunities, and really for organizations to realize they need to work together more. Competition is okay, but I believe, looking at a unified opportunity for Montessori is an important agenda.
Yeah, I think it's widely agreed by the people who know you that that's definitely one of your legacies, is that you're a consensus builder and you were very good at getting people together and, being able to discuss compromises and come to agreements. What do the Montessori world is notoriously divisive, and you were able to succeed in that, despite this tendency of Montessorians to, let's say, not practice not walk the talk that we do with children when we're with other adults. What's your secret in being able to do that? What do you think was the skill that you had, or the characteristic that you had, or the strategy that you used to get Montessorians together and agree?
It's a personal one, but more importantly, I'll talk a little bit about the Trust for Learning. But to me, it's about building relationships. So, like Virginia from AMI USA and I, we were part of something called CAPE, the Council for American Private Education, and we met several times a year, and Virginia and I got to know each other, as sitting at the table together and going to the bar at night. And when you build those personal relationships, I think then it's a lot easier to talk about, opportunities to work together. The second thing is that, again, I mentioned the Trust for Learning. It became the Trust for Learning, but initially it was called the Montessori Leaders Collaborative, and I know, Mark, you were part of it. But they brought together the leaders of the Montessori organizations, 2-3 day, retreats, meetings, and I'm trying to remember, maybe it was over 4 years. And they spent, when all was said and done, they spent close to $1 million in underwriting travel expenses. It would be like they would bring Andre Robofoy from Europe. They flew him over. So it gets expensive when you're flying people, paying for a hotel, staying in, having a lot of great meals, a lot of wine. And they also had a professional facilitator, was very expensive. So that effort really, I think, it strengthened the relationships. I mean, some people didn't know each other, but through the MLC, it began to create those friendships, those relationships. And the MLC got to a point, and their parent was the Trust for Learning, where they just decided they were going to go in a different direction. And so they ended their financial support. And that's lacking right now. I mean, informally, we continue to try to build relationships, but there's not that amazing thrust that their resources made possible.
I think you're right about relationship building being the crucial thing. I remember in the first meetings of the MLC, we had AMI USA in one corner, AMS in another, Tim Selden in another corner, and Trevor Eisler and I were in the middle because we didn't have organizations. And then it wasn't really until we went out for dinner and they pulled out the great wine, and the people pulled out their family photos and, and started showing each other and talking about their families and sharing stories. And it was really that opportunity that you started to see the next day, the ice melt in the room, and people started to make overtures and be willing to discuss issues that were previously off the table.
Yeah, you've said that very well, and you were part of it, so but that costs money. I always come back to money in the business model. It costs money to build those, to get those things started. But continuing relationships now with Zoom and with just phone call. I mean, there's a lot that can be done to build those relationships. But again, maybe I'm being overly critical, but if I head at an organization and I'm competing with you, I don't really need to have much of a relationship with you, unless my relationship is more of how can I beat you, win over
Yeah.
you through a competition.
Yeah,
But
and
the
it's
hope
so
is
odd
that,
because
you know,
yeah, as Montessorians, we know how destructive competition is in the classroom, and we do our best to rid the classroom of competition. And
yeah,
yet,
and children working together and children, multi-age. You said it better than I do. Again, Montessori, one would think, creates the basis why communication is so critical.
yeah, are the big donors still there in the United States? Do you know? Is that money drying up? It seems that's a very different benefit that you have in the United States than we have in Australia, where that kind of
Yeah.
philanthropic money is not as available as it is in the United States. You
Well,
you
the
talked
Walton,
about the Walton
yeah,
Foundation, and I know Bezos has given a couple of billion to Montessori. Are there others
there
that
are,
are still giving that
oh,
kind of money?
Walton, again, they created something. It's one of the family members, and then they hired a woman, Nora, and she's retiring. So they provided multi-year grants to AMS, I think AMI might have gotten some money, to MPPI. So they provided a lot of support. But if that money has come to an end, there might be some possibility of something continuing, but I think they're going to go in different directions. The Trust for Learning, their structures, they're like a collaboration of foundations, but their thrust is something they've labeled ideal learning. And then they would say, like Montessori and and they list all the other forms of ideal learning. But that's the umbrella they're using. And they have generated foundations that support ideal learning. Some of it comes to Montessori. They funded us, at AMS, MPPI for a few things. Um, they provided funding for a project to really increase the effectiveness of Montessori with Head Start. So they are again a collaboration of funders, but their agenda is much
And
broader with learning.
your Trust for Learning was started, correct me if I'm wrong, started by a couple of Montessori moms in Connecticut, right? Who had a lot of
Yeah.
money. And what was the motivation for the Walton Foundation? Was there a connection to Montessori that led them to want to fund Montessori?
Um, Let me just mention about the moms. I had a call once, and I thought they were based up in Boston, and lo and behold, I found they were in the community next door to me in Wilton, and and it was from a foundation. So I take any call from a foundation; it's the highest priority. And they they probed with me. They said, "Rich, what should we do? What does the field need?" And we talked about two major thrusts. One was to support things like research, public policy, accreditation. The second one was to bring the organizations together to collaborate more. Their school was an AMI school, and they understood the real um, divide between AMS and AMI. And so they chose to put their money into, what became the Montessori Leaders Collaborative to build collaboration. And they hoped out of that collaboration would come strengthened programs. Um, I'm not sure, and I think what they did once, it was some of you may have been in Portland, Oregon, when the International Montessori Conference, I guess that's really spearheaded by AMI. And the Trust for Learning brought together a bunch of funders for a reception. And James Walton was there and some others. But I think that really helped to begin the relationship with James. And I think one of the reasons he was very interested in Montessori, he's based in Colorado, and they had done a fair amount with charters, with one or two charter schools. I don't know the specifics of it, but and I don't know. He may even be as a child. Maybe he went to a Montessori school, but it was really his personal interest and being a family member. Obviously, I guess every family member there has a huge pot of money and their own foundation to support. But it was through James that really then, created that commitment to supporting the Montessori community. I wish there were more people like him. And one small example relates to some other things, but some of you may have read. I think it's been news now for a couple of weeks, but Elon Musk is starting a Montessori school outside of Austin, and even though I have a lot of issues with his politics, but he is creating a school. They've just advertised for an AMI accredited teacher, and they want to serve the children of the family members that are part of, I don't know if it's SpaceX, one of his companies. Mm-hmm. But when you have a name like Musk, I mean, he gets a lot of visibility, and mm-hmm. I don't know what he's going to do, if anything, to support Montessori. The same with Bezos. You mentioned, the Bezos Academy, and they've committed a tremendous amount of money to start schools. They use the phrase "inspired by Montessori." And at the National Center, we had a contract with them initially to train their teachers. Now they're doing it through Higher Ground. But Bezos is a real player in the field, and they're building their own network. And we're trying to stay in touch with them. Whether they'll ever provide funding, to go beyond what their own schools are doing, I don't know. But we're trying. But we need more funders. I'm sure you could use some funders in Australia that have some deep pockets that could provide the unrestricted support that organizations need.
When I was living in the United States, I remember schools would, when they were hiring prospective teachers, they would ask, "Did you train at a MACD accredited training program?" rather than asking, "Are you AMI trained or AMS trained or whatever?" Do you think that's still the thrust in the United States, or is it changing to be more, divisive between the big
I'm not sure it's
organizations?
changing. I think there's still a major, kind of separation. So if I met you, Mark, at a conference, I would probably say, "Well, where were you trained?" And I might say AMI or AMS or one of the others, and you would ask me, where I was trained, and usually if one is AMI, they're part of their own organization, network, family, whatever. Same is true with AMS, and I think both organizations are doing everything they can to build their own community and to strengthen their own community. I'm not sure I would ask whether your program is MACD unless I knew about MACD. So MACD needs to be more visible, and people don't understand accreditation as well as they should. And it's complicated in the US because of these other organizations.
I know there was a global census recently that AMI did that found there were 16,000 schools worldwide that are Montessori-based, authentic Montessori-based. That sounds like a lot, but when you do the numbers compared to the total number of schools around the world, which I believe is around 5.5 million, it's a minuscule percentage. It's less than 1%. How is it that after a century, we're not Montessori, which is such a fantastic, anybody who witnesses a Montessori classroom, I believe, has the experience of kind of waking up and understanding what children are capable of, what we could really do in education, and yet we're still so far away from Maria Montessori's dream of changing society from within. Why do you think that's the case still after more than a century?
Yeah,
we're not more popular.
The way I'd like to approach that is if our conversation started with, if I said, "Hey, you all, I have an education method that's fantastic. And let me tell you a little bit about it. It's over 100 years old. It's global. It's in many, many countries, rich, poor, wherever. It reaches private and public schools. A lot of them, that this method is based on research, and it can demonstrate it's effective. It's in many cases it's secular, but it's also faith-based. I know here in the U.S., Catholic, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Montessori. It's infant, toddler through elementary, secondary. Some people are looking at Montessori at this method post-secondary, and it's comprehensive. And then you would say, "Oh, tell me about what is this method?" And I would say, "It's Montessori. Have you ever heard of it?" And when you list all those things, it just is beyond me to not understand why Montessori hasn't grown more. I can't think of anything else that one could, you could mention Waldorf, but that's small. Steiner's small, but and then if I ask myself, well, why hasn't it expanded? It probably goes back to Maria Montessori and some of the politics of when she came to the U.S. and there was a real collaboration, but then they didn't like what AMS was doing, and so then AMI became separate. And so there's a lot of things that have happened that go back to the competition, the independence of organizations. I really believe that to dramatically expand the visibility of Montessori education, it needs to be through a major public relations initiative, et cetera, but it needs to be supported by all the organizations. And I'm hoping that can happen over the next few years, but that to me is the challenge. And then the other thing that, when I said in the beginning, let me tell you about this method, education method. And if I said it's the Powell method or the Unger method or the named after a person, I think we all, I know I would be suspicious, about something named after a person. I'm not proposing that we drop the name Montessori, but I do think that a lot of people are cautious or skeptical about something called Montessori. Once they learn about it, then I think they become much more positive. But I think it's basically the growth. Well, again, going back to public relations, if more families, parents knew about Montessori education, then they would want to send their child to a Montessori school. And again, private and independent, wonderful. Public, doesn't cost anything. So there needs to be more schools. If there's more schools, then there needs to be the quality of the recognition program. And if there's more schools, there needs to be more trained, highly prepared teachers. So that creates an incentive for more teacher ed programs. So my view of the world is looking at visibility, public relations, marketing, as that could dramatically expand the number of children that have an opportunity to be part of Montessori education. But it's somewhat of a dream.
Yeah, and then there was that very, very visible clash that resulted in a court battle in 1967 over the term Montessori and who has the rights to use that, where AMS and AMI, who was it who took the other to court? I can't remember the detail, but it ended up in the court.
I don't either, but it was, AMS was involved, and, it finally came out that one could not, protect or trademark or copy the word Montessori. So the good news, I guess, is it's available to everyone. But then it raises the whole question of how we maintain quality as we, expand the method.
Yeah. So you rightly point out, I think that that divisiveness within the Montessori community is probably a big factor in why we don't have more visibility and more Montessori schools and training centers around the world. What do you think is the way how can we get through this? Like, how can we bring more Montessorians together more worldwide?
again, when I've asked colleagues and others in organizations the way you just phrased it, I think their response often is, well, that's not an issue. That's not a problem. We got a lot of our own work to worry about, AMS and AMI and others. So they, to some extent, I think, feel comfortable in the political situation the way it is. I'm hoping that they would see more opportunities for growth. And we all always end up, what's the most important thing with our work? It's the child, right? It's the child who has the opportunity to be part of a Montessori education. And then if you say, well, how can we get more opportunities for children to be part of a quality Montessori education? Then that comes down to the public, private, the schools, rural, urban, et cetera, et cetera. So the hope is that, I guess, through building community, we can build more, through the relationships, we can build more opportunities to start looking strategically at how we could expand marketing visibility of Montessori education. My observation is, if someone said, I'll go with 5 million. Here's $5 million to create a major initiative, marketing initiative, then the organizations would come to the table because they would see, a huge amount of money and it's something they could be part of, and then that money could drive. I don't think we're going to find that money in the near-term future. So I still want to try to look at the strategies and the opportunities to build that.
Yeah. So we don't, I mean, another Montessori organization is not feasible, of course, but so we're looking at more of a federation structure to bring Montessori organizations that already exist together. Do you think MACD offers the best hope for that kind of working together and bringing Montessorians around the table to agree on strategy and to agree on standards?
MACD can be an advocate for that, but I'm not sure they're going to have a tremendous amount of influence. I mean, in a way, it because of the challenges between AMS and AMI, they need, from my point of view, they need to become leaders in promoting greater collaboration. And they probably would say, if they were part of this conversation, that they are doing things, they are supporting things that are helping the organizations to move closer together. But I believe it's going to have to come from and then the International Montessori Council and whatever the other organizations are, Bezos, Higher Ground, some of the private ones. And I'm sure in Australia, you have your own, set of structures. But I think it's going to just have to be the leaders of those organizations coming together and seeing the opportunity. What has happened in our states, and again, this is a change management strategy. If there's a crisis, I don't remember, like Colorado or something, the state wanted to, they didn't want children to be able to hold plates or hold scissors or whatever, and they were gonna shut down. They were gonna say Montessori schools were not allowed to do such and such. Well, that triggered the Montessori community to come together. AMS, AMI, all forms of Montessori, and they worked together because they were faced with a potential crisis. Rather than hope there's a crisis. I mean, the pandemic did provide some, I think, opportunity, but people were still competing a lot. But I'm not promoting that they're advocating that there be a crisis that would bring us all together. I rather would be that we would be idealistic and we would see the opportunities for working, together on more subjects. And MACD could certainly be a partner in all of that, but I don't see them as the main one.
Wow, looking around at the world now, we don't think we have enough of a crisis to bring these organizations together. It seems pretty dire in many ways. Looking at at least in the US politics coming up, we've got, I just look at the options and I think surely the United States can produce two better candidates for the leader of the free world than Trump or Biden.
Yeah, and again, I won't comment on that, but I know with my work with China, um, both AMI and AMS, but they work totally independently in China. They have done a masterful job in marketing their brand. So AMS has a meeting or has an event. It's always, I see all the Chinese, because I don't speak Mandarin, but I see all the Chinese characters, but then I see AMS. Or if it's another network, it's AMI. So they have promoted their own brand in China. And, I've felt, at least in the last couple of years, that because of the politics between the US and China, um, even though there's still an interest in China with something that's quote American, or it could be Canadian or it could be British, they like us because they see us as representing quality. And that would probably go for Australia also. But the as with corporations, with tech, with everybody here is politically worried about doing something more in China. So it'll be interesting to see, I guess, more than interesting. Whatever happens this year with our elections are going to impact a lot of opportunities globally.
Rich, from your experience working with these two big organizations, what is it that prevents them from working together more deliberately in promoting Montessori as a whole rather than their own brands?
I mean, I'm not on the inside of both organizations, but if they were here, they would probably be upset with me because they are doing things. So they would right away talk about things they've done with each other, things they've done with other organizations. But I would respectfully say, that's nice, but why can't you do a lot more? And I guess it's, I don't know, I struggle a lot with why. Sometimes it's personal relationships. If a leader of one organization doesn't know another, that prevents that opportunity for having conversations. Other times it's just the pressure of a financial business model, that if I'm doing a conference and you're doing I mean, literally, I guess AMI had their conference 2 months ago. AMS had their conference a few weeks ago. National Center, we have our conference in April. International Montessori Council had their conference last fall. They've all had their own conference, and I understand that conference is a great revenue generator. So each one's trying to build their own conference. And I remember one time I used to say, well, why couldn't AMI and AMS do a joint conference or an overlapping conference? I never got anywhere, but the problem is most of the organizations, especially if you do a large event, you plan it many years in advance and you sign contracts, and it's hard then to build in even a coordinated effort. So but again, I want to end being positive. To me, if there are conversations, then a lot of times one can find vehicles to allow for more cooperation, overlap with conferences, with school accreditation, with teacher education affiliation. But without the conversations, it's hard to come up with those joint solutions.
So we need more opportunities for that relationship building to happen.
Yep. And I do again, I'm excited about what you're doing. There's so much to be learned from, a country. What's happening in Germany? How are they approaching? What's happening in the Netherlands? What's happening in Australia? What's happening in the US and Canada? And each country has its own history, its own relationship with Maria Montessori, with organizations, its own legislation, federal, national, or state, provinces. So there's a lot to be learned from, what one country is doing that seems to be effective in building, viable organizations. So I'm a real advocate for that.
Does anybody listening have a question or a comment for Rich they'd like to ask?
Yeah, I've been talking a lot and trying to respond to Mike's questions. And I see your audio taping this. Is that something you'll share? So maybe
Yes.
with the larger
Yeah.
community, but
All the Montessori
what other
Lives
questions? Anybody?
episodes
I'm
that
trying to
I
see.
share.
Alex is here, and Shirley, Vicky, Sarah Jane. You call in people, Mark. If anybody has questions.
Anybody can unmute themselves and speak up. Sarah Jane.
Richard, thank you very much, because I completely concur with you. At the moment, I'm running 6 students from Monash University, their 4th year Bachelor of Education or Master students. 2 left their placements at the end of last week in tears, like, I can't believe this school's here. I had no idea. I feel so privileged being here, and can I come back for my last placement? I've had one ask me today if whether we've got a job for her, and one just starting now thinking about his Montessori training. So I've got a really successful. I've actually got one doing, she's now in a 4th year grad last year. She was on placement, and we've employed her as an assistant. So she's got that beautiful mentoring layer, and she's enrolled in the AMI 3 to 6 course, and we're heavily supporting her. So that we have now found, if we get these graduates, either 2nd, 3rd or 4th year uni grads, heavily mentor them, give them just a rock star placement. I've had a really good success rate with that. The other thing is, I had the privilege a number of years ago of meeting Eli and Edith Broad, and I know that they've heavily, because when I had dinner with him, they were heavily into sponsoring the charter schools. So I spent 3 hours chewing his ear on Montessori schools and what was going on in America. Now, if you look on their website, there is an area there that you can apply for grants. Now, I know they're heavily involved in the arts. They've donated $2 billion worth of art, and they've got their own art gallery in LA. But
Sure.
I just feel, if the Walton one's starting to run low, that may be an avenue that you could try. Too difficult for us here in Australia, because he was Eli was very American centric, and I couldn't really engage him on looking at a philanthropic pathway into Australia. But that might be something, just give it a go, because they're very education orientated.
Yeah, I appreciate your reminding me of. I'm not sure if they pronounce it Broad or Broad, but I followed them over the years. I haven't done recent research. I will now, and like everything else where we started, if I sent a letter, it'll probably get thank you very much, Mr. Unger. We're not interested in it. Somehow I have to find someone there and meet with them like you did. And then, are you familiar with Montessori, and try to build those relationships that then leads to them saying, well, we'd consider. And what we did with, with the Waltons, again, it's more of a strategy, is start with a planning grant. Give us a little bit of money to build a strategy for public relations, whatever. But I'll definitely look into them. And again, I know they're a major commitment to the arts, but also, as you mentioned, charter schools. So.
Yeah. And the other family that I've also known personally in my past were the Black and the Deckers. So they've got foundations set up, and I know Virginia and Alonzo did a lot of work with the university in Baltimore. So I don't know whether that's a pathway, but it could well be, because there is money there.
Could you repeat the name of that? The couple of the foundation?
Yeah, Virginia and Alonzo Decker, as in Black and Decker.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with them.
So there was Black and Decker Power Drills.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm familiar Black and Decker, but
Yeah, now they've both died, but I know that they worked very closely and were very philanthropic with the university in Baltimore. So whether or not that's a, who knows? I'm a big one. Just ask and
yeah. No, I'll look into them too. And as you
just
may
have a
be
look.
aware, there's a major presence of Montessori in Maryland, in Baltimore.
Yeah,
Future education programs, schools, charter, private. I mean, so Maryland is a great state for
well, it's a great
Montessori.
state, and when they died, they actually left their phenomenal property on Cherokee Bay to the university to use as research and housing for people undertaking research. So look, it's just worth a go. Too hard here in Australia. I reckon Elon Musk, I'd just knock on those boys' doors. Give it a go.
Yeah.
Richard, I just think I'm at the point where Mark is too. You've just got to say it how it is. I just think our brand and what we have, you know, it's over a century old. What we're doing is absolutely phenomenal. For me to have student teachers crying last Friday of I don't know where this place is. I had no idea, and here I am 22, 23. We haven't studied it, and they were completely blown out of their waters. And I know several of them are going to change their teaching pathway as a result. But we've got, as you and Mark said, we've got such a unique opportunity here, and yet our governments, federally and state, I don't know, no one hears us. No one's really interested in it.
I've seen the same.
It makes me really sad, actually, at times.
Well, as all of you know, whether it's a parent or a foundation or if you can just get them into a classroom for an hour,
it's gold.
It'd be great. Then all of a sudden,
Richard, it's gold.
Yeah, I've never seen it before, and then they start asking questions.
And you know, I had the supervisor and the head of faculty from Monash University. So the Monash is one of our biggest universities in Australia. It's comes in just under Melbourne University in here in Victoria. And she was completely, they were both utterly blown away. And I go, our doors are open. We're here. We've been here for 50, this school's been here for 50 years, and we are around the corner. And I said, you can come any day, any time. And they were like, yes, we will. But we've even set up time to do lectures there. We'll go and do a lecture, but it just doesn't get that traction. So it has to be more in a government, state and federal level for us, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Sarah Jane is at Melbourne Montessori School, which is one of our flagship schools in Australia. But I've seen the same thing. I teach a class at University of Sunshine Coast on alternative education, and it's a fourth year class. And I had a student last week just shake her fist and tell me, you know, why am I just hearing about this in fourth year? You know, it would have changed what I was doing for the first 3 years if I'd known about this. You know, all of the stuff that I've been hearing that now doesn't make as much sense as it did. Anyway, Rich, you have given us so much to think about. If you could sum it up in a few words, what can we learn in Australia about growing Montessori from your experience in the US?
I guess the way I would sum it up would be to continue to do what we're doing right now, reaching out. I saw that like Biff Meyer was at your conference last year, but when you can bring folks from the US, or when we can connect like I have been with you, Mark, and just have those conversations like you're doing with MACD. So it's conversations, it's building relationships, and it's being optimistic. You know, I talk about the challenges, but I much rather focus on the opportunities ahead of us. And it's money. And the one thing I haven't mentioned at all, I'm surprised I haven't, but I've been a real advocate of the fact that Montessori is a major opportunity for peace education, or education for peace. And Erica Moretti, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Erica, has written a book on, Montessori and peace education. And to me, in this, well, again, I'm getting political now, but we need peace. And if we can help our children, grow up understanding how to cooperate and be part of a community, that can build a peace agenda. But that's a whole other conversation. But that may provide some opportunities for, work across countries. And within
I liked your
countries.
idea too, your suggestion about talking about the qualities of Montessori rather than using that name in particular. I agree that that's something that kind of alienates us when we use that term, particularly when it's associated with the image of an elderly Italian woman dressed in black who died 52 years ago.
But I would quickly add that, and it's a disagreement I have with the leaders of the MLC and the Trust for Learning, is their approach would be, and I believe Mr. Broad has passed away, but let's say he was still alive, and let's say I had a meeting with, or we all had a meeting with him next week. Their approach would be, don't mention Montessori, go in and talk about ideal learning and experiential learning. And I'm like, wait a minute, why can't we just go in there and talk about Montessori education and then talk about what's unique about it, but not sidestep? They said, well, Rich, if you get an audience on ideal learning, then eventually you'll have a chance to tell them about Montessori. But everyone's different, but I just think we have to find ways to generate that level of interest. Enough said.
Rich, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And I know, what time is it there now where you are?
It's 5 a.m.
So you got up at 3:30 a.m. for us. Thank you so much.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you all. And maybe someday I'll get to meet you again on a webinar, or maybe even get to Australia. Okay.
Hope so.
Okay.
Hope so.
Waiting, Rich.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Mark.
Good night.
It was ace.